Some stories find you when you need them most. This one found me on a quiet afternoon, leafing through old letters in my grandmother's cedar chest. It reminded me that courage doesn't always wear a badge or carry a rifle. Sometimes, it's just one person doing what's right when everybody else looks away. The Old West was full of such moments, small kindnesses that changed everything. I hope this tale brings you the same comfort it brought me. It's about a young woman who refused to break, and a rancher who remembered how to care. Pull up a chair. Let's begin. The rope cut into her wrists. Grace Holloway had stopped counting the hours. The church bell had rung 7 times since they tied her to the hitching post. But she'd lost track somewhere around noon when the sun climbed high enough to cook the back of her neck. Her tongue felt thick, swollen. No water since dawn. Her calico dress hung limp with sweat. Her lips cracked and bleeding. Dust coated her throat with every breath. Folks passed by. Some she recognized from Sunday services. Mrs. Patterson clutched her market basket tighter and crossed to the other side of the street. Old Mr. Henley spat tobacco juice into the dirt and kept walking. Not one of them looked her in the eye. On the general store porch, Emmett Mercer leaned against the railing, arms folded, watching her like a man waiting for a horse to finally give up fighting the bit. His father stood beside him. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats. Steady. Unhurried. A rider coming in from the east road. She didn't lift her head. Didn't have the strength left for hope? From the data we've received, 60% of our viewers haven't subscribed or liked this show yet. We hope you'll subscribe and support us to create even more quality content in the future. Thank you kindly. And we'd love to know, where are you watching from today? The stranger didn't say a word. He just walked through the crowd like they weren't there. Tall, weathered. A bone-handled knife appeared in his hand. Grace heard the wet snap of hemp parting, felt the rope fall away from her wrists. Red welts. Raw skin. She swayed. Easy now. His voice was low, rough. He caught her elbow, steadied her. Can you ride? She nodded. Wasn't sure if it was true. He helped her onto his horse. The saddle leather creaked under her weight. She grabbed the horn with both hands, knuckles white. You're making a mistake. Stone, old Mr. Mercer's voice cut across the square. The stranger didn't turn around. Wouldn't be my first? He swung up behind her, gathered the reins, and nudged the horse forward. Grace felt the animal move beneath her, steady and sure. She kept her back stiff, a hand's width of air between her and the man's chest. The town fell away behind them. 2 miles of prairie grass. 2 miles of nothing but hoofbeats and wind. Grace's head swam. Her tongue felt like leather. She gripped the saddle horn tighter, fighting to stay upright. A canteen appeared over her shoulder. Drink. Slow. She drank. The water was warm, tasted like tin. She'd never tasted anything better. It ran down her chin, soaked into her collar. She didn't care. More. She shook her head, handed it back. Another mile passed. The sun dropped lower, painting the grass the color of old brass. You got a name, Mr. Stone. Caleb Stone. She waited for more. It didn't come. Grace, she said. Grace Holloway. Much obliged for. All this. Ain't nothing yet. A pause. Wait till you taste my cookin'. The trail rose over a shallow ridge. A cabin appeared below, modest, clean, set back from a creek lined with cottonwoods. Split-rail fence circled a garden gone wild with late spring growth. A barn stood off to the left, paint peeling, but roof solid. A dog burst from behind the barn, black and white, ears pricked. It circled the horse twice, barking sharp, then planted itself in front of them, with its tail whipping back and forth. Easy. Patch, she's all right. Grace slid down from the saddle. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the horse's flank, breathing hard, on the porch railing, half hidden in shadow. A woman's sun-bleached bonnet hung from a nail. Its ribbons stirred in the evening breeze. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and old grease. Grace stood just inside the doorway, taking stock. One room served as kitchen and sitting area. A cast-iron stove squatted in the corner, its pipe running up through the roof. A table with 2 chairs. A shelf of books more than she'd expected. A rocking chair near the window with a rope-woven seat worn smooth by years of use. Through a doorway, she glimpsed a rope-frame bed. His room. Spares through there. Caleb nodded toward a second door. Got its own window. Washstand's got water in the pitcher. She walked to the door he'd indicated. Pushed it open. Small. Clean. A narrow bed with a corn husk mattress covered by a faded quilt. Coal oil lamp on a 3-legged nightstand. A porcelain wash basin. And pitcher on a simple wooden stand. Lye soap in a chipped dish. The room smelled like cedar and dust. Like nobody had slept here in a long time. She turned back. Caleb was already at the stove. Striking a match to the kindling. I'll have something ready in a bit. Ain't fancy. I ain't hungry. He looked at her then. Really looked. His eyes moved from her cracked lips to her swollen wrists to the way she held herself, shoulders hunched, arms wrapped tight across her chest. When's the last time you ate? She tried to remember. Yesterday morning. A heel of bread and some water from the pump behind Mrs. Crawford's boarding house. Before the Mercer men came for her. Yesterday, I reckon. Then you're hungry. Sit down. She sat. The fire caught. Caleb moved with the ease of long practice, setting a cast-iron skillet on the stovetop, cutting thick slices from a slab of salt pork. The grease started to sizzle. He opened a tin of beans and dumped them in beside the meat. Grace watched his hands. Big hands, scarred across the knuckles. Working hands. He didn't whistle or hum while he cooked, just worked. The smell of frying pork filled the cabin. Her stomach clenched. She pressed a hand against it, willing it to stay quiet. He set a plate in front of her. Beans and salt pork, still bubbling. A day-old biscuit on the side. A tin cup of water from the pump. Much obliged, she said. He sat across from her with his own plate. They ate in silence. The beans were good, better than good. She hadn't realized how empty she was until she started filling up. She cleaned her plate. Every last bite. When she looked up, Caleb was watching. There's more if you want it. No. She stopped, swallowed her pride. Yes. Please. He served her another helping. Smaller this time. She ate it slower, tasting it now instead of just swallowing. When the plates were empty, she stood and gathered them before he could move. I'll wash up. He didn't argue, just leaned back in his chair and let her work. The pump outside the kitchen window brought up cold water. She scrubbed the plates with a rag and a sliver of soap, working the grease out of the cast iron with salt and a brush. The familiar motion steadied her hands. This, at least, she knew how to do. She noticed the books on the shelf while she dried the plates. Leather spines, worn soft with handling. Shakespeare, Dickens. A family Bible with a cracked spine, its pages edged with gold. "Didn't figure you for a readin' man," she said. "Winters are long." When she came back inside, Caleb was at the stove, pouring coffee from a dented enamel pot. "You take coffee, if you got enough." He poured 2 cups, handed her one. The tin was hot against her palms. "Porch," he said. "Cooler out there." She followed him outside. The sun had dropped below the ridge, leaving the sky streaked orange and purple. Caleb settled into one of the 2 rocking chairs. Grace took the other. The wood creaked under her weight. They sat, drank their coffee, watched the light fade. Somewhere out in the dark, a coyote called. Another answered. "You gonna tell me what happened?" Caleb's voice was quiet. No pressure in it. Just a question. Grace stared into her cup. The coffee was strong, bitter. "Emmett Mercer," she said. "You know him?" "I know the family, but own half the town. He wanted to marry me." She took a breath. "I told him no." Caleb didn't say anything, just waited. "He didn't take it well. His daddy took it worse." She lifted her wrists, showed him the rope burns in the fading light. Decided to make an example. Show folks what happens when a woman don't know her place. "They tied you up in the town square for saying no to a proposal, for shaming him in front of witnesses," is how they put it. "Whole town watched him do it. Not one person spoke up." The silence stretched. The coyotes had gone quiet. "Your folks?" Caleb asked. "Dead. 4 years now. Fever took 'em both. Same week." "Anyone else?" "Aunt in Denver. Was saving money to get there. Had a job sewing for the Mercantile. Room at the boarding house. Had it all figured out." Her voice went flat. "That's done now." Caleb rocked his chair. The runners creaked against the porch boards. "I told him no," Grace said. "That's the whole of it." "Then you ain't got nothing to be ashamed of." She looked at him. His face was half shadowed in the dusk. "Town don't see it that way. Town ain't here." The words hung in the cooling air. Grace felt something loosen in her chest. Not much. Just a fraction. "I should leave come morning," she said. "Find my way to Denver somehow." "You done enough already." "Denver's 300 miles. You got money for the stage." She didn't answer. They both knew she didn't. "Stay till you figure out where you're going," Caleb said. "Ain't nobody running you off my land?" "Why?" He took a long drink of his coffee, set the cup down on the porch railing. "Because somebody should have done something back in that square? Nobody did?" He stood, his chair rocking empty behind him. "I ain't in the habit of explaining myself, Miss Holloway. You're welcome here till you ain't. That's all I got to say about it." He walked back inside. The screen door swung shut behind him. Grace sat alone in the dark, listening to the night sounds settle around her. The creek murmuring, the horses shifting in the barn, Patch's tags jingling as he circled on the porch and lay down at her feet. She looked at the empty rocking chair beside her. on the seat cushion, worn into the fabric by years of use, was the faint impression of a body smaller than Caleb's, a woman's shape. She thought about the bonnet on the porch railing, the spare room that smelled like cedar and dust, the way Caleb moved through this cabin, like a man trying not to touch anything that might remind him. Where was she now, the woman who'd worn that bonnet? And why did Caleb Stone live out here alone, 5 miles from a town that seemed to have forgotten he existed? Grace woke before the sun. The spare room was still dark, but she could see the window going gray at the edges. She lay on the corn husk mattress, listening. No sounds from the main room, just the creek murmuring outside and a mockingbird warming up somewhere in the cottonwoods. She'd slept hard, deeper than she had in months. The bed smelled like cedar and clean cotton, and for a long moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then it came back. The rope, the square, the stranger who'd cut her free. Day 2. She swung her legs off the bed. The floor was cold under her bare feet. She found her shoes, pulled them on, and crept to the door. The main room was empty. Caleb's bedroom door stood open, bed already made. Corners tucked tight. The stove was cold. No coffee made. Grace looked around, found the coffee tin on the shelf, the grinder beside it. The enamel pot hung from a nail near the stove. She got to work. By the time the sky turned pink over the ridge, she had coffee boiling and was sitting on the porch with a cup in her hands. Patch lay at her feet, his tail thumping against the boards whenever she looked at him. The screen door creaked. Caleb stepped out, still tucking his shirt into his trousers. He stopped when he saw her, saw the cup in her hands, smelled the coffee. "Made enough for 2, Grace said. He stood there a moment. Then he went inside and came back with his own cup, steam curling up in the morning air. He settled into the other rocking chair. They watched the sun come up. "You always eat breakfast standing up?" Grace asked. Caleb glanced at her. "Ain't had a reason to sit down in a while?" "Well..." She took a sip of her coffee. "You got one now." He didn't answer, but he didn't get up either. By the 3rd day, they had a rhythm. Grace was up before Caleb, coffee ready, biscuits in the oven. The biscuits weren't good too flat, too dense, but he ate them without complaint. "Show me what needs doing," she said after breakfast. "You dining almost. I ain't gonna sit around like some house cat." Caleb studied her. She held his gaze. "Fence line needs checking. You know how to spot a loose post?" "I can learn." He handed her a pair of leather work gloves, worn soft at the fingers, too big for her hands. She put them on anyway. They walked the fence together, Caleb pointing out the signs, a post leaning 2 degrees off, true, wire gone slack between the spans, a section where cattle had rubbed the wood raw. Grace listened, asked questions, didn't pretend to know things she didn't. "You catch on quick," he said, "somewhere around the 3rd mile. I had good teachers growing up. My daddy was a farmer before the fever took him." Caleb nodded. They kept walking. That afternoon, he showed her the chicken coop, a dozen hens, one rooster with a torn comb and a nasty disposition. Grace collected eggs while the rooster circled her, puffing up his feathers and making sounds like a man clearing his throat for a fight. "He always this friendly. That's just Luther. All bluster. No bite." Grace held out the egg basket. 7 eggs, brown and speckled, nestled in the straw lining. "Not bad for a first try," Caleb said. "Not bad at all." On the fourth day, Grace found the creek. Caleb had gone to check on the cattle in the north pasture. Grace finished her morning chores, early eggs gathered, stove blacked, floors swept, and walked down the path behind the barn. The creek ran shallow and clear over a bed of smooth stones. Cottonwoods lined the banks, their leaves catching the breeze and making a sound like whispered secrets. She sat on a flat rock and pulled off her shoes. The water was cold. It made her gasp when she stepped in. The stones slick under her feet. She waded out to her ankles, then her calves. Her skirt hiked up and knotted at her knees. Minnows darted away from her shadow. The current tugged at her legs. She stood there, eyes closed, feeling the water move around her. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't thinking about Emmett Mercer or the rope burns on her wrists or what would happen next. She was just standing in a creek, feeling the sun on her face, on the bank. She found wildflowers growing in a patch of soft earth, purple and yellow, delicate as paper. She picked a handful, careful not to crush the stems. Back at the cabin, she put them in a tin cup with water from the pump, set them on the kitchen table. Caleb came in for supper, stopped, looked at the flowers. He didn't say anything, didn't move them either, just sat down and ate his beans. That evening, Patch chased Luther the rooster around the yard. Grace was hanging wash on the line when it started the rooster squawking, the dog barking, feathers flying everywhere. Luther made a break for the fence, flapped his useless wings, and landed face first in the dirt. Patch skidded to a stop, confused, then pounced. The rooster escaped under the coop. Patch lay flat on his belly, trying to squeeze through the gap, his tail wagging furiously. Grace laughed. The sound surprised her. It came up from somewhere deep, somewhere she'd forgotten existed. A real laugh, full and loud, echoing off the barn. She pressed a hand to her mouth, looked toward the cabin. Caleb stood in the barn doorway, pitchfork in hand, watching her. His face was hard to read in the fading light, but he didn't look away. Day 5. Grace took over the cooking entirely. She'd found flour and lard in the pantry, buttermilk in the spring house. She made biscuits, real biscuits this time, light and flaky, brushed with bacon grease before they went in the oven. Caleb ate 3 without meaning to, reached for a 4th, then caught himself. "These ain't half bad. My mama's recipe. Grace poured more coffee into his cup. "She taught me before she passed." They ate in comfortable silence. Outside, the evening was coming on soft and golden, the kind of light that made everything look like an old painting. "You ain't half bad at this ranchin' business," Caleb said. "I had good teachers." "You had one teacher? He mopped up bean juice with his last bite of biscuit, and he can't cook worth a damn." Grace smiled. It felt strange on her face. Strange, but not wrong. After supper, they sat on the porch like they did every evening now. The wildflowers on the table had started to wilt, but neither of them had thrown them out. Grace had picked fresh ones that morning, added them to the same tin cup. "Caleb," he looked at her. "That bonnet on the porch railing, the one with the faded ribbons?" She hesitated. "That belonged to your wife, didn't it?" His jaw tightened. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. "Ellen," he said. Her name was Ellen. Her name was... What happened to her? The silence stretched. The creek murmured. A night bird called from somewhere in the cottonwoods. "Fever," Caleb said. "4 winters back. She was gone before the doctor could get here from town." Grace watched his profile in the dying light, the hard line of his jaw, the way his hands gripped the armrests of his chair. "I'm sorry. It was a long time ago. Don't mean it don't still hurt." He didn't answer. They sat in silence, listening to the night settle around them. Patch's head came up suddenly. His ears pricked forward, pointed toward the road. "What is it, boy?" Caleb leaned forward. Then Grace heard it too. Hoofbeats, coming from the direction of town. Caleb stood. His hand moved to his hip, then stopped. No gun there. He'd left it inside. The rider appeared over the ridge. A single figure on a roan horse, the last light catching the glint of metal on his chest. A badge. Grace's stomach dropped. "That's Sheriff Briscoe," Caleb said. His voice had gone flat. Mercer must have sent him. The sheriff's roan picked its way down the ridge, hooves clattering on loose stone. Grace could hear her own heartbeat in her ears. Loud. Too loud. Caleb stepped off the porch. He moved slow, deliberate, putting himself between the approaching rider and the cabin door. No gun on his hip, no weapon in his hands. Just his body, solid as a fence post, planted in the yard. Patch growled low in his throat. Grace reached down and gripped his collar. Sheriff Tom Briscoe reined up at the edge of the yard. He didn't dismount. That meant official business. Grace knew the protocol staying mounted kept things formal, kept the visit short. A man who climbed down was a neighbor. A man who stayed in the saddle was the law. "Evening, Caleb." Briscoe touched the brim of his hat. His eyes flicked to Grace on the porch, then back to Caleb. "Didn't expect to find you with company." "Didn't expect company myself. Tom, what brings you out this way?" The sheriff shifted in his saddle. His badge caught the last of the light, winking like a warning. "Got a complaint filed in town? The Mercers." He cleared his throat. "They're saying you took a woman against her will, kidnapped her right out of the town square." Grace's fingers tightened on Patch's collar. The dog whined. Caleb didn't move, didn't raise his voice. "They're lying, Tom. You know it. I know it. I gotta follow up on complaints. Caleb, that's my job." "Then you followed up. You can ride back and tell 'em you done your job." Briscoe's jaw worked. He looked past Caleb to the porch, to Grace, standing there with her knuckles white on the dog's collar. "I'm gonna need to hear it from her." Grace let go of Patch. She walked to the edge of the porch, her legs steadier than she'd expected. The sheriff watched her approach, taking in her calico dress, her bare feet, the healing rope burns on her wrists. "Miss Holloway?" He tipped his hat. "You want to tell me what happened? I reckon you already know what happened." "Sheriff?" Her voice came out flat, harder than she'd intended. "You were there. The whole town was there. 7 hours I stood tied to that post, and not one person said a word." Briscoe's face reddened. He looked away. "That ain't the Mercers said you was... The Mercers tied me up like a dog for saying no to their boy. Mr. Stone cut me loose. He didn't take me anywhere. I got on his horse of my own free will." "That true? Caleb, you heard the lady?" The silence stretched. Somewhere in the cottonwoods, The nightbird called again. Patch had stopped growling. He sat at the edge of the porch, watching the sheriff with his head cocked. Briscoe sighed. He took off his hat, ran a hand through his thinning hair pump, put the hat back on. "Look," he said, "I ain't here to cause trouble, but the Mercers got influence in this town. They ain't gonna let this go. I ain't asking 'em to let it go." Hey, Caleb's voice was quiet, steady. "I'm telling you what happened. What you do with it is your business." "They're talking about charges. Caleb, kidnapping? Maybe worse. On what evidence her word against theirs? And she just gave you her word." Briscoe shifted in his saddle again, his horse stamped, impatient. "You ain't the first person to have trouble with that family, Caleb. There was a girl worked for 'em a couple years back. Left town sudden like. Nobody knew why." He paused. "Folks talk, but nobody ever says nothing official. You understand what I'm saying?" Grace felt her stomach tighten. Another girl? Another silence. "I understand," Caleb said. "Now you understand me. Miss Holloway ain't going nowhere she don't want to go. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever." Briscoe looked at Grace again. Something moved behind his eyes. Shame. Maybe. Or just the weariness of a man who'd spent too many years doing what he was told instead of what was right. "You sure about this, Miss, once I ride back without you? Things are going to get harder? The Mercers don't forget." Grace lifted her chin, the same way she'd lifted it in the town square, 7 hours into the rope and the heat and the watching eyes. "I ain't going back with you, Sheriff. Not tonight. Not ever." Briscoe nodded slowly. He gathered his reins. "This ain't over, Caleb." "I reckon not." Caleb stepped aside, clearing the path to the road. "But today is—" The sheriff turned his horse. He rode back the way he'd come, the roan's hooves loud in the evening quiet. Grace watched until he crested the ridge and disappeared. Then her knees buckled. Caleb caught her elbow. His grip was firm, steadying. He guided her to the porch steps and sat her down. "Put your head between your knees." She did. The blood rushed to her face. Her hands were shaking. She couldn't make them stop. "Stay here." He went inside. She heard him moving around the kitchen, the clatter of the stove grate, the pump working. He came back with a tin cup of water. "Drink?" She drank. The water was cold, fresh from the well. It helped. Caleb sat down on the step beside her. Not too close. Just close enough. They sat in silence while the sky went from purple to black. Stars came out, one by one, scattered across the darkness like spilled salt. "Why?" Grace asked finally. Her voice was hoarse. "Why are you doing this? You don't know me. You got no stake in this fight." Caleb didn't answer right away. He picked up a pebble from the step, turned it over in his fingers, tossed it into the yard. "I knew a man once," he said. "Good man. Worked hard, kept his head down, didn't bother nobody. One day, some fellas decided they didn't like him. Beat him outside the saloon. Whole town watched. Nobody lifted a finger." Grace waited. "I was 19 years old, stood there with everybody else. Told myself it wasn't my business to... Told myself there was nothing I could do." He picked up another pebble. "He died 3 days later. Never woke up." The nightbird had gone quiet. Even the creek seemed to hold its breath. "I made myself a promise after that. Said I'd never stand by again. Never watch something wrong happen and tell myself it wasn't my concern." He tossed the pebble. It clicked against the first one. "I ain't kept that promise as well as I should have." but I'm keeping it now. Grace looked at him. His face was hard to read in the darkness, just the outline of his jaw, the shadow of his hat brim. You could lose everything, she said. Your land, your cattle. The Mercers got enough money to bury you in lawyers and debts. I know. And you're still going to do this. He turned to look at her. In the starlight, his eyes were dark and steady. I know enough about you, Miss Holloway. I know you stood in that square for 7 hours and didn't beg, didn't cry, didn't give him the satisfaction. He stood, brushing the dust off his trousers. That's enough for me. He went inside. The screen door swung shut behind him. Grace sat on the porch, staring at the road where the sheriff had disappeared. Her hands had stopped shaking. The rope burns on her wrists throbbed with her pulse. Patch came and lay down beside her, his head on her knee. She stroked his ears, feeling the soft fur under her fingers. Caleb Stone had just made an enemy of the most powerful family in the county. For her, a woman he'd known less than a week. She didn't understand it, didn't know what to do with it. But sitting there in the dark, with the dog warm against her leg and the stars wheeling overhead, she made herself a promise too. Whatever came next, she wouldn't let him face it alone. Inside the cabin, she heard Caleb moving around. The scrape of a chair, the clink of glass, then nothing. Grace stood. She walked to the window and looked in. Caleb sat at the kitchen table, a bottle of whiskey in front of him. He wasn't drinking, just staring at the amber liquid, his hands flat on the table, his shoulders bowed under some weight she couldn't see. On the table beside the bottle, catching the lamplight, was a daguerreotype in a leather case. A woman's face, young, pretty, smiling at whoever held the camera. Ellen. The rain started on the morning of day 8. Grace woke to the sound of it drumming on the shake roof, a steady rhythm that filled the cabin with gray light and the smell of wet earth. She lay in bed, listening. The cornhusk mattress rustled as she shifted. Outside, the creek was running louder than usual, swollen with runoff from the hills. No work today. The fence lines could wait. The chickens were already fed, the eggs collected, the stove stocked with wood. She found Caleb in the main room, feeding kindling into the fireplace. The iron grate glowed orange. Smoke curled up the chimney. Coffee's on, he said without turning around. She poured herself a cup and sat in the rocking chair by the window. The rain streaked the glass, blurring the view of the barn and the cottonwoods beyond. Everything looked soft, indistinct, like a painting left out in the weather. They didn't talk much that morning. Caleb read from a book, something with a worn leather cover and pages gone yellow at the edges. Grace mended a tear in her calico dress, her needle moving in and out of the fabric with small, precise stitches. The fire crackled. The rain fell. The hours passed. By afternoon, the clouds had thickened. Lightning flickered on the horizon, followed seconds later by the low rumble of thunder. Patch whined and pressed himself against Caleb's leg. "He don't like storms," Caleb said. "Can't say I blame him." They ate supper early beans again, with the last of the salt pork and biscuits Grace had made that morning. The fire had burned down to coals, casting long shadows across the floor. Grace set down her fork. She'd been thinking about this all day, turning the words over in her mind. "The grave up on the hill," she said. "Behind the barn? That's your wife. Ain't it?" Caleb's hand stopped halfway to his coffee cup. He set it back down. Was The fire popped. A log shifted, sending sparks up the chimney. "You don't have to talk about it," Grace said. I seen the daguerreotype the other night, through the window. I wasn't spying. I know." His voice was quiet, not angry, just tired. "I should have put it away." "No." She shook her head. "No, you shouldn't have. A man's got a right to remember." The silence stretched between them. Outside, the rain intensified, hammering the roof like 1,000 tiny fists. Lightning flashed. Closer now. The thunder followed almost immediately. "Ellen," Caleb said. "Rauma." Her name was Ellen. Grace waited. "We was married 6 years. Met her in town. She was working at the Mercantile. Back when old Mr. Harrison still owned it. Before the Mercers bought him out." He picked up his coffee, took a long drink, set it down again. "She was the prettiest thing I ever saw. Hair like honey. Laugh that could fill up a room." His hands lay flat on the table, big and scarred, the knuckles white. "The fever came in January, started as a cough, then got worse. I rode to town for the doctor, but the roads was iced over. Took me 2 days to get there and back." He paused. "She was gone before I walked through the door." Grace didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. "I sold our place in town, couldn't stand to look at it no more. Bought this land with what was left. Built the cabin myself, board by board. Figured if I kept busy enough, I wouldn't have to think about it. Did it work?" For a while, he looked at her then, his eyes dark in the firelight. Then it didn't. The fire had burned down to embers. Grace got up, added another log, watched the flames catch and climb. "You been out here alone all this time. Seemed easier than the alternative." "What's the alternative?" He was quiet for a long moment. The rain drummed on. The thunder rolled. "Feeling something," he said finally. "Losing it again." Grace sat back down. Her hands were trembling. She folded them in her lap to keep them still. "Yeah," she said. "I know that arithmetic." He looked at her, waiting. "My folks died when I was 16, she said. "Both of them, same week. The fever took my mama first, then my daddy 3 days later. Doctor said his heart just gave out. I think he didn't want to live without her." The words came easier than she expected. She hadn't talked about this in years, hadn't wanted to. But sitting here, in this cabin, with the rain falling and the fire burning low, it felt safe somehow, like the words could go somewhere and not come back to haunt her. "My aunt in Denver took me in. She's a good woman, strict, but fair. She taught me to sew, to cook, to keep house. Said I needed skills if I was going to make my own way in the world." "So how'd you end up in Copper Creek?" Grace laughed, but there was no humor in it. "A teaching position, or so I thought. A man came through Denver looking for a school teacher. Said the town had just built a new schoolhouse. Needed someone to run it. The pay was good. The room and board was included. I figured it was my chance to start fresh." "What happened?" "I got here, and there wasn't no schoolhouse, wasn't no teaching position neither. The man who'd recruited me, turns out he was working for the Mercers. They wanted a young woman in town. Someone without family, without connections. Someone who wouldn't be missed if things went wrong." Caleb's jaw tightened. "They set you up." "From the start, old Mr. Mercer offered me a room at the boarding house. A job at the Mercantile. Seemed like kindness at the time. I didn't see the price tag till Emmett started coming around. The fire crackled. A gust of wind rattled the windows. Some folks see kindness and can't help but charge for it, Caleb said. Grace looked at him. And some folks don't charge at all. I'm still figuring which one you are. He held her gaze. I ain't asking for nothing, Miss Holloway. I know. She stood, gathering the empty plates. That's what confuses me. She washed the dishes in silence, scrubbing the cast iron with salt and a brush, stacking the plates to dry on the wooden rack beside the pump. When she turned around, Caleb was standing by the door, pulling on his coat. Where are you going? Barn. Gotta check on the horses. In this weather? He didn't answer, just opened the door and stepped out into the rain. Grace watched him go, the dark shape of him disappearing into the downpour. Lightning flashed, illuminating the yard for a split second, the barn, the fence, the hill behind it, the grave. She could see it from here, just barely. A wooden cross, weathered gray, standing alone on the hillside. Wildflowers grew around its base, bent low under the weight of the rain. She went to bed, but she didn't sleep well. The storm raged outside, thunder rolling across the hills like cannon fire. She lay in the dark, listening to the rain, thinking about Ellen, about Caleb, about the way grief could hollow a person out and leave them standing, but empty. She knew that feeling. She'd lived with it for 4 years. Morning came gray and wet. The rain had stopped, but the clouds hung low and heavy, threatening more. Grace was up early, coffee made, biscuits in the oven. When Caleb came in from the barn, he stood in the doorway, dripping on the floorboards. Storm's moving east, he said. Good. He hung his coat by the fire, stood there a moment with his back to her. You asked about Ellen, he said. About the grave? Grace set down the coffee pot. I did. You want to see it? She wasn't sure what she'd expected. Not this. If you're willing to show me. They walked up the hill together, the grass still wet from the storm. The grave sat at the top of the rise, sheltered by a stand of aspens, a wooden cross, hand-carved. The name faded but still readable, Ellen Stone. Beloved wife. Caleb took off his hat, held it against his chest. Grace stood beside him. Not too close, just close enough. The wind stirred the aspen leaves. They made a sound like whispered prayers. I come up here most mornings, Caleb said, but his voice was quiet, rough. Don't say much. Just stand here a while. Let her know I ain't forgot. Grace didn't say sorry, didn't offer comfort. Just stood with him in the gray morning light, 2 people bound by losses they couldn't explain and couldn't escape. After a while, Caleb put his hat back on. Thank you, Grace said, for showing me. He nodded. They walked back down the hill together. She thought that was the end of it. But when they reached the cabin, Caleb stopped at the porch steps. Ellen would have liked you, he said. She had a way of seeing the good in folks, even when they couldn't see it themselves. He went inside before Grace could answer. She stood on the porch, looking back up at the hill. The cross was barely visible from here, just a dark shape against the gray sky. She thought about Ellen, about the woman who'd worn that bonnet, who'd sat in that rocking chair, who'd made this cabin a home. She thought about Caleb, 4 years alone with his grief and his silence. And she thought about herself, about what she was doing here, about what she was starting to feel. The sound of hoofbeats broke through her thoughts. Not from the road this time, from the west, from the direction of the Mercer Ranch. A rider was coming, moving fast. Grace's heart dropped into her stomach. The rider crested the ridge, a young man on a bay horse, dust rising behind him even on the wet ground. He pulled up at the gate, breathing hard, and held out an envelope. "Letter for Mr. Stone," he said. "From the Mercers." Caleb took the envelope from the rider's hand. The boy didn't wait for a response. He wheeled his horse and galloped back the way he'd come, disappearing over the ridge in a cloud of mud and spray. Grace watched Caleb turn the envelope over. A wax seal on the back, a fancy M pressed into red wax. His jaw tightened as he broke it open. He read it once, then again. His face went still as stone. "What's it say?" He didn't answer, just folded the letter and slipped it into his pocket. "Caleb, what does it say?" He looked at her then, and something in his eyes made her stomach drop. "Nothing that concerns you." "The hell it don't." She crossed the yard and held out her hand. He stared at her for a long moment, then pulled the letter from his pocket and handed it over. The handwriting was elegant, feminine. The words were not, "Mr. Stone, Miss Holloway has 1 week to leave Copper Creek and the surrounding county. Should she fail to comply, we will be forced to pursue legal action regarding your outstanding loans with the First Bank of Copper Creek, as well as certain irregularities in your water rights documentation. We trust you will make the sensible decision. Regards, the Mercer family." Grace read it twice. Her hands were shaking by the time she finished. "They can't do this." "They can." Caleb's voice was flat. "They own the bank. They got lawyers in Cheyenne who'll say whatever they're paid to say. Water rights out here, it's all handshake deals and old surveys. They find one line that don't match up. They can tie me up in court for years. For me," the words came out strangled, "they'd destroy you for me. They ain't doing it for you." He took the letter from her hands, walked to the cabin, opened the stove grate. "They're doing it because I made 'em look weak. A man cut their rope in front of the whole town. They can't let that stand." He dropped the letter into the flames. It curled black at the edges, then caught, then was gone. "They're bluffing," he said. They got to be. You willing to bet your ranch on that?" He didn't answer. Grace felt something crack inside her chest. All the warmth of the past week, all the small moments of peace, they shattered like glass dropped on stone. "I gotta go, she said. "You know I gotta go." "You ain't going nowhere." "Caleb," I said no. "This ain't your choice to make." Her voice cracked. She stopped, pressed her hands against her face. Her fingers were cold, trembling. "You're gonna lose everything. Your land, your cattle, the house you built with your own hands. For what? Some woman you met 10 days ago. It ain't about you." "Then what's it about?" He turned from the stove. His eyes were hard, but underneath the hardness, she saw something raw, something bleeding. "It's about whether I can still look at myself in the mirror come morning." "And what about me?" The words came out before she could stop them. "What about how I look at myself? You think I can live with knowing I destroyed a good man's life? You think I can carry that?" He didn't answer. Grace dropped her hands. Her eyes were burning, but she wouldn't cry. She wouldn't give herself that relief. "I'm a burden," she said. "That's all I am. A burden you picked up on the side of the road because you felt sorry for me. And now I'm going to drag you down into the mud with me." "That ain't true." "It is true." She was shaking now, her whole body trembling like a leaf in a storm. "I got nothing. Caleb, no money, no family, no skills worth a wage. I can't even go back to town without getting tied to another post, and I'm worthless. And you're throwing away everything you got for someone who ain't worth the trouble." The words hung in the air between them. Ugly words. True words. Caleb stood there looking at her. His face was unreadable. "You done?" he asked. She didn't answer. "Because that's the most fool thing I ever heard come out of your mouth." He walked toward her, stopped an arm's length away. "You ain't a burden. You ain't worthless. And you sure ain't dragging me nowhere I don't want to go. Caleb, I made my choice when I cut that rope. I'm making it again now." He reached out, took her hands in his. His palms were rough, calloused, warm. "Stay." Grace looked at their joined hands, his big and scarred, hers small and trembling. She pulled away. "I can't." She went to her room and closed the door. The night was endless. Grace lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. The moon moved across the window, painting silver rectangles on the floor. She heard Caleb moving around the main room for a while, then silence. She didn't sleep. Couldn't sleep. The letter burned in her mind. The Mercers' words. The threats. The certainty that they would do exactly what they said. She thought about Caleb standing at Ellen's grave that morning. The way he'd held his hat against his chest. The weight of 4 years of grief carved into every line of his face. He'd already lost everything once. She wouldn't make him lose it again. She rose before dawn. Her carpet bag was under the bed where she'd left it. She packed quickly the few clothes she'd washed and mended. The coins she'd saved from her sewing work before everything fell apart. Not much. Barely enough for a meal and a night's lodging. She found a scrap of paper on the nightstand. A pencil stub. She wrote quickly, her hand shaking. "Don't come after me. You done enough." She left it on the kitchen table, weighed down with the tin cup that still held the wilted wildflowers. The door creaked when she opened it. She froze, listening. No sound from Caleb's room. She stepped out onto the porch. The sky was going gray at the edges. The morning star hung low over the ridge. Patch was there, lying by the steps. He lifted his head when she came out, whined low in his throat. Grace knelt down. She cupped his face in her hands, felt the soft fur, the warmth of his breath. "You take care of him," she whispered. "You hear me? You take care of him." The dog whined again but didn't follow when she stood. She walked to the gate. Her boots squelched in the mud from yesterday's rain. The carpet bag was heavy in her hand, heavier than it should have been, weighted with everything she was leaving behind. At the gate, she stopped, turned. The cabin sat quiet in the gray light. The rocking chairs on the porch, side by side. The bonnet still hanging from its nail. The wildflowers she'd planted by the steps, just starting to bloom. She thought about the grave on the hill, the name carved into the cross. She thought about Caleb's hands, rough and warm, holding hers. She turned away and started walking. The road to town was 5 miles. She'd walked further before. She'd walk further again. The mud sucked at her boots with every step. Her hem grew heavy with it, dragging in the muck. She stumbled once, caught herself, kept going. Her calves burned. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. By the time she'd gone half a mile, she was covered in mud to her knees. Her dress was ruined. Her hair had come loose from its pins, hanging in damp strings around her face. She looked like exactly what she felt like, a woman with nothing, going nowhere. Then she heard the hoofbeats, not from behind, from ahead. 3 riders, coming from the direction of town, moving fast. Grace stopped, shaded her eyes against the rising sun, squinted into the light. The lead rider wore a black coat. Beside him, 2 men in work clothes, faces hard, hands resting on their saddlebags. Emmett Mercer and 2 of his father's hired men. They'd been waiting for her. Grace didn't run. There was nowhere to run. Open prairie in every direction. The ranch half a mile behind. Town 4.5 miles ahead. She stood in the middle of the muddy road, carpetbag in hand, and watched the 3 riders approach. Emmett Mercer pulled up first. His black coat was buttoned high despite the morning chill. His face was clean-shaven, his hair slicked back with pomade. He looked like a man going to church, not a man hunting a woman at dawn. "Miss Holloway?" He tipped his hat. "Fancy meeting you out here." The 2 hired men flanked him. One was young, barely 20, with a scraggly beard and nervous eyes. The other was older, heavy-set, with a scar running from his ear to his jaw. Neither of them looked at her directly. "Mr. Mercer?" Her voice came out steady, steadier than she felt. "My father got word you was leaving Stone's place." Emmett swung down from his horse, boots squelching in the mud. "Figured I'd come escort you back to town myself. Make sure you got there safe." "I don't need an escort." "Now, that ain't neighborly." He stepped closer, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something sweet and cloying, like rotting flowers. A woman alone on this road, all sorts of things could happen. Grace's fingers tightened on the handle of her carpetbag. The leather creaked. "I said no once. Mr. Mercer, my answer ain't changed." Emmett's smile didn't waver. But something shifted behind his eyes. Something cold. "See? That's your problem. Miss Holloway, you don't understand how things work around here. When a Mercer makes an offer, folks accept. It's just the way of things." He reached out, took hold of her arm. Grace pulled back. His grip tightened. "Let go of me. Now, don't make this harder than it needs to be. I said let go." The young hired man cleared his throat. "Mr. Mercer, maybe we should—" "Shut up, Cody." Emmett didn't turn around. His eyes stayed locked on Grace. "This is between me and the lady." Grace's heart was pounding. She could feel the sweat beading on her forehead despite the morning chill, the tremor in her legs. But she didn't look away, didn't beg. "You gonna drag me back to town?" she asked. "Tie me up again. Make another example, if I have to. And then what? You think that's gonna make me say yes? You think fear's gonna make me love you?" Something flickered across Emmett's face, a crack in the mask. "Love ain't got nothing to do with it," he said. "This is about respect, This is about knowing your place. My place. Grace laughed a hard, bitter sound. My place is wherever I choose to stand. And I ain't standing next to you. Not now. Not ever. Emmett's hand came up fast. Grace flinched, bracing for the blow. It didn't come. The older hired man had caught Emmett's wrist. His scarred face was grim, his grip firm. That's enough, Mr. Mercer. Emmett spun on him. What do you think you're doing? Jenks, stopping you from making a mistake? Jenks released his wrist, stepped back. Your daddy hired me to keep you out of trouble. Hitting a woman in the middle of the road ain't keeping you out of trouble. She's got it coming. Maybe she does. Maybe she don't. That ain't my call. Jenks mounted his horse, gathered the reins. But I ain't gonna stand here and watch it happen. I buried a wife and 2 daughters in the war. I ain't got much left. But I got my line. And this is it. He turned his horse toward town. The young one, Cody, hesitated, looking between Emmett and Jenks. Cody. Jenks's voice was flat. Let's go. Cody followed. Emmett stood alone in the road, his face flushed, his hands clenched into fists. Grace watched the 2 riders disappear over the ridge. You think this changes anything? Emmett's voice was low, shaking. You think those cowards matter? My father owns this town. Every business, every farm, every soul in it. You got nowhere to go. Nowhere to hide. Grace looked at him. Really looked. He was tall and well-dressed, with his father's money and his father's name. But underneath all that, she saw something small, something scared. You're right, she said. I got nowhere to go, but that don't mean I got nothing left. She started walking, past him, toward town, toward whatever was waiting for her there. Emmett didn't follow. The walk took nearly 2 hours. Grace's legs burned. Her eyes felt gritty from lack of sleep. The mud dragged at her boots, adding pounds with every step. By the time she reached the outskirts of town, her whole body ached. The town square was not what she expected. It wasn't empty. It wasn't quiet. A crowd had gathered near the general store, not the usual morning bustle, but something different. Women. A dozen of them. Maybe more. Clustered in small groups, talking in low voices. They stopped when they saw her. Grace walked to the edge of the square, her carpet bag heavy in her hand. Her calico dress was caked with mud to the knees. Her hair hung in tangles around her face. She looked like something dragged out of a ditch. A woman stepped forward from the crowd. Martha Brennan, the blacksmith's wife. A stout woman with gray-streaked hair and hands roughened by years of hard work. Don't you go to them alone, young girl. Martha's voice was firm. We've been waiting. Grace blinked. What? Jenks rode in 20 minutes ago. Told us what happened on the road. Told us you was coming. Martha took her arm, guided her toward the group. We figured it was time. Time for what? Another woman emerged from the boarding house. Then another from the church steps. Then 3 more from the alley beside the saloon. Grace counted them. 8, 10, 12 women, forming a loose circle around her. She knew some of their faces. The pastor's daughter, pale and thin, clutching a handkerchief. The widow who ran the boarding house, her eyes red-rimmed. A young woman Grace didn't recognize, barely out of her teens. with a baby on her hip. "What is this?" Grace asked. Martha looked at the other women, then back at Grace. "We've been silent too long," she said. "All of us. We watched what they'd done to you, and we said nothing. Told ourselves it wasn't our business. Told ourselves there was nothing we could do." She paused. Her voice was shaking now. "But it is our business, because it ain't just you. It ain't ever been just you." The young woman with the baby stepped forward. "My name's Clara Vance," she said. 2 years ago, I worked as a housekeeper for the Mercers. Emmett." She swallowed. "Emmett tried the same with me. When I said no, they threw me out, called me a liar, said I'd made it all up for attention." Grace stared at her. "I didn't know. Nobody knew. Because I didn't tell nobody. I was ashamed. I thought it was my fault." Clara's voice cracked. "I left town, went to live with my sister in Laramie, had my baby there, didn't come back till last month." "Why'd you come back?" Clara looked at the other women. "Because I heard what they'd done to you, and I knew if I didn't speak up now, I never would." One by one, the other women spoke. The widow who'd lost her boarding house lease after she refused to give Emmett a room for free. The seamstress who'd been blacklisted from every shop in town after she rejected his advances. The pastor's daughter, who'd been told to keep quiet about what she'd seen at a church social 3 years ago. Story after story, voice after voice. Women who'd been silent, women who'd been shamed, women who'd carried their secrets alone because they thought no one would believe them. Grace listened. Her legs were trembling from exhaustion. Her eyes burned. "Why now?" she asked when they were done. "Why tell me this?" Martha took her hand. Her grip was firm, warm. "Because you did something none of us had the courage to do," she said. "You said no. You stood there in that square, tied up like an animal. And you didn't break. You didn't beg." "I wanted to," Grace whispered. "Lord knows I wanted to. But you didn't." Martha squeezed her hand. "And that meant something. It meant maybe we could find our courage too." Hoofbeats. Grace turned. A rider was coming from the east road. Moving fast, dust rising behind him. "Caleb." He pulled up at the edge of the square. His horse lathered and blowing. His eyes found Grace, scanned her for injuries, then moved to the circle of women surrounding her. "Grace." His voice was rough. "I found your note. I thought... I know what you thought." She walked toward him, stopped at his horse's shoulder. "But you were wrong." She gestured at the women behind her. "I ain't alone. Caleb, I ain't never been alone. I just didn't know it yet." Caleb looked at the women, at Martha Brennan and Clara Vance and all the others, standing together in the morning light. The door of the general store banged open. Old Mr. Mercer stepped out onto the porch, his face purple with rage. Behind him, Emmett mud on his boots, fury in his eyes, and 2 more hired men. "What in blazes is going on here?" The women didn't scatter, didn't flinch. Martha Brennan turned to face him. "We're telling the truth, Mr. Mercer. Something this town should have done a long time ago. This is slander." Emmett pushed past his father. Every word of it lies and slander from a bunch of hysterical women. The pastor's daughter stepped forward. Her voice was quiet, but it carried across the square. "Then call the marshal. Mr. Mercer, let's all of us tell our stories under oath. Let's see who the town believes." The square went silent. Old Mercer's face worked, his hands clenched and unclenched at his sides. He looked at the women, at the few men who had gathered at the edges of the square, at his son standing beside him with sweat beading on his forehead. Then he looked at the church steps. Pastor Thomas stood there, Bible in hand, watching. His face was unreadable. "Pastor," Mercer called, "you gonna let these women spread lies about my family in front of your church?" Pastor Thomas was quiet for a long moment. The wind stirred the dust in the square. "Perhaps," he said slowly. "We've all been complicit in silence too long." The words hung in the air. Old Mercer's face went from purple to white. He grabbed Emmett's arm, yanked him toward the store. "This ain't over," he spat. "Not by a long shot." The door slammed behind them. Grace stood in the center of the square, surrounded by women who had finally found their voices. Caleb was beside her now, his hand on her shoulder, his presence solid and warm. But she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the church steps, where Pastor Thomas still stood. His eyes met hers across the square. He nodded once, and Grace understood the battle wasn't over. The Mercers would regroup, find new ways to strike. But something had shifted today. A crack had opened in the wall of silence. Now the question was whether that crack would widen into daylight or whether the Mercers would find a way to seal it shut forever. The Mercers didn't come back out. Grace stood in the square, watching the closed door of the general store. The curtains in the upstairs windows twitched once, twice, then went still. Behind that door, she knew. Old Mr. Mercer was calculating his next move. But for now, he'd retreated. That was something. That was more than she dared to hope. The women began to disperse, slowly, in twos and threes. Martha Brennan squeezed Grace's hand one last time before heading toward the blacksmith's shop. Clara Vance lingered, shifting her baby to her other hip. "You got somewhere to stay?" she asked. Grace looked at Caleb. He stood beside his horse, reins loose in his hand, waiting. "I reckon I do," she said. Clara nodded. Her eyes were red, but there was something new in them, something that looked almost like peace. "Good," she said. "That's good." She walked away, her baby cooing softly against her shoulder. The square was emptying now. Shopkeepers emerged from their doorways, sweeping their porches, pretending nothing had happened. A few men gathered near the saloon, talking in low voices. The pastor had gone back inside his church. Sheriff Briscoe appeared at the edge of the square. He walked toward Grace, his boots loud on the packed earth. His badge caught the midday sun. Grace tensed. Briscoe stopped in front of her. His face was hard to read, tired, maybe, or ashamed. "Miss Holloway," he said. It was the first time anyone in this town had called her that with respect. Not girl, not that woman. Miss Holloway. She nodded. "Sheriff." He looked at the closed door of the general store, then back at her. "I ain't gonna pretend I done right by you," he said, "and I didn't, and I got to live with that." He paused. "But if you need anything, if anyone gives you trouble, you come find me." "Understood." Grace studied his face. The lines around his eyes, the gray in his mustache, the weight of too many years doing what he was told instead of what was right. I understand, Sheriff. He tipped his hat and walked away. Caleb brought his horse alongside her. You ready? Almost. She walked to the hitching post, the one they'd tied her to 11 days ago. The rope marks were still there, dark stains on the weathered wood. She touched them, ran her fingers over the rough grain. Then she picked up her carpetbag and turned her back on it. Now I'm ready. They rode out of town together. Grace took Caleb's mare, the good one, the one she'd meant to leave behind that morning. Caleb led the other horse, a gentle bay gelding he'd borrowed from the livery. The road stretched ahead, winding through the prairie grass toward the distant ridge. The sun was high, the sky clear, the wind warm on her face. Her mud-caked dress had dried stiff against her legs. Her arms ached from carrying the carpetbag, but she was riding away from that square, and that was all that mattered. You came after me, Grace said. You took my good mare. Caleb's voice was dry. Couldn't let that slide. That all? He was quiet for a long moment. The horse's hooves clopped steadily on the packed earth. No, ma'am, he said finally. That ain't all. But the rest can wait till I figure out the words. Grace smiled. It felt strange on her face, strange but right. They rode in comfortable silence. The prairie rolled out around them, endless and gold, dotted with wildflowers and the occasional stand of cottonwoods. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. What happens now? Grace asked. Don't know. Caleb squinted at the horizon. Mercers ain't the type to let things go. They'll find another way to come at us. But word's gonna spread. What happened today, folks'll talk. Cheyenne, Laramie, all the way to Denver. The Mercer name ain't gonna shine so bright after this. He looked at her. You planning on going somewhere? I ain't got nowhere else to be, she said. If that's all right, it's all right. They crested the ridge. Below, Stillwater Ranch spread out in the afternoon light, the cabin, the barn, the creek winding through the cottonwoods. Smoke curled from the chimney. Patch was a black and white blur racing up the road to meet them. Grace reined in the mare, looked down at the place that had become, somehow, without her meaning it to, home. Caleb. Yeah? Thank you. She paused, searching for the right words. Not just for cutting me loose that first day, for all of it, for letting me stay, for not asking questions I wasn't ready to answer, for standing with me when you didn't have to. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he nudged his horse forward, starting down the slope toward the cabin. You don't owe me thanks, he said. I didn't do nothing any decent man wouldn't do. That ain't true, and you know it. He didn't argue. They rode down to the cabin, dismounted in the yard. Patch circled them both, barking and wagging, his whole body vibrating with joy. Grace knelt to scratch his ears, and he licked her face, his tongue warm and wet. Missed you too, boy, she murmured. Caleb led the horses to the barn. Grace watched him go, then turned to look at the cabin. The wildflowers she'd planted by the porch steps were in full bloom now, purple and yellow and white, swaying in the evening breeze. The bonnet still hung from its nail on the porch railing, but someone had moved it to the side. A second nail had been hammered in beside it. Empty, waiting. She walked up the steps, pushed open the door. The main room was just as she'd left it. The cast iron stove, the table with 2 chairs, the shelf of books, the rocking chairs by the window, the tin cup on the table, still holding the wilted wildflowers she'd picked days ago. She set down her carpet bag, took off her bonnet, looked at the empty nail beside Ellen's. She hung her bonnet there, 2 bonnets, side by side. Caleb came in from the barn. He stopped in the doorway, looking at the bonnets on the railing. His face did something complicated, a flicker of something old and painful, then something softer, something new. "You hungry?" he asked. "Starvin'." They made supper together. Grace cooked the beans while Caleb sliced the last of the salt pork. They moved around each other in the small kitchen, not speaking, not needing to. The rhythm was easy now, familiar. They ate on the porch, plates balanced on their knees, watching the sun go down behind the hills. The sky turned orange, then pink, then purple. The first stars appeared, faint and silver. Patch lay at their feet, his head on his paws, his tail thumping occasionally against the boards. "Caleb?" "Yeah." Grace set down her plate, turned to look at him. "I ain't the same woman I was 11 days ago," she said. "I don't know who I am now. I don't know what I want, or where I belong, or what comes next." Caleb set down his own plate, waited. "But I know one thing." She reached out, took his hand. His palm was rough, calloused, warm. "I ain't going nowhere." He looked at their joined hands, his big and scarred, hers small but steady now. "I know," he said. "That's the point." They sat together in the gathering dark, watching the stars come out one by one. The creek murmured below. The night birds called from the cottonwoods. Somewhere far off, a coyote sang to the rising moon. Grace leaned her head against Caleb's shoulder. He didn't stiffen, didn't pull away, just shifted slightly to make room for her. "The Mercers'll be back," she said. "You know that. I know. And the town, it ain't healed. Not yet. Maybe not for a long while. Maybe not." "So what do we do?" Caleb was quiet for a long moment. The stars wheeled overhead, ancient and indifferent. "We do what we've been doing," he said finally. "We get up in the morning, we check the fence lines, we feed the chickens, we make coffee and biscuits, and sit on this porch and watch the sun come up. That's it. That's enough." He squeezed her hand. "That's more than enough." Grace closed her eyes. The evening air was cool on her face, carrying the scent of sage and wildflowers and wood smoke. She thought about the woman she'd been 11 days ago tied to a post, abandoned by everyone she'd trusted, waiting for a rescue that never came. She thought about the woman she was now scarred and tired and uncertain, but standing, still standing. And she thought about the man beside her, the man who'd cut her loose without asking for anything in return, the man who'd given her shelter and space and time to find her feet, the man who'd ridden after her when she tried to leave, not to stop her, but to stand beside her. "Caleb?" "Yeah. I think I could be happy here." He turned to look at her, in the starlight. His eyes were dark and warm. "Yeah," he said. "I think I could too." The church bell in town struck 9, faint and distant. The sound carried across the prairie, marking the end of one day and the beginning of another. Grace lifted her head from Caleb's shoulder. She looked out at the dark hills, the silver ribbon of the creek, the cabin that had become her home. "It's late," she said. "We should get some sleep." "Reckon so." Neither of them moved. Patch lifted his head, looked at them both, then settled back down with a contented sigh. The stars burned overhead. The wind whispered through the grass. And on the porch of a cabin 5 miles from a town that was learning, slowly, to find its voice, 2 people sat together in the dark, not saying anything, not needing to, just being. Some stories leave us sitting quiet for a while afterward. This one might be one of those. There's a heaviness that comes from watching someone stand alone in a place where nobody speaks up. Many of us know that feeling, being unseen, carrying something we never asked to carry, waiting for a word that doesn't come. And there's a tenderness, too, in watching someone finally find solid ground after walking so long on shaky earth. Perhaps you've known a Grace in your life. Perhaps you've been one. Perhaps you've been a Caleb, someone who did a small thing without knowing how far it would reach. These threads don't need to be tied up neatly. The Mercers are still out there. The town is still learning. Grace and Caleb are still figuring out what comes next. That's how life works. Isn't it? We don't get endings. We get mornings. It's all right to let this story rest now. It's all right if something in it stays with you a while, unnamed and unresolved. Some things are meant to be carried, not explained. Thank you for staying until the last page. Thank you for listening.